And so here we are. Can you believe it's Easter already? Yes, it is. And what is Easter anyway? Is it one day in the year when we celebrate something that happened 2,000 years ago? No, it's not. No, it's not. Easter, Passover, spring is that time of year as nature cycles when you and I are called into renewal, resurgence, regeneration of life and living. As we watch that beautiful phoenix rising up out of winter and bringing with it that beautiful fire of color and fragrance and spreading it all over the land, it's not just something that's happening out there. It's also happening within ourselves if we recognize it and if we respond to it. The cycles of life are always in our experience, and they're there for a good reason. So as the poet says, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? And so though some of us may be in the winter of the moment, maybe some of us are still experiencing Friday as not such a good Friday either, we have to remember not to stay stuck in Friday, but to look to the Sunday that's coming. The rising of the new life, the new possibility, and the new experience out of the darkness of the Friday experience. And that's what this time is all about. We are celebrating the constant, continual, eternal rising of the Christ life always through its creation, through nature, through you, and through me. We're celebrating the movement of humanity out of an enslavement into freedom of newness in a new land. We're celebrating spring breaking through the doominess and gloominess and the grayness of winter that looks like things are dead, bursting through all of that, and with its radiant fire and light and splendor, covering the land with such beauty and grace that it takes our breath away. I love to watch that creeping blanket of purple move all over the place, and all the various flowers and buds blossom, and without effort, it seems, or any at all hard work. It just happens. It just comes through like that. Now that's what we're celebrating here today. And so all of us in this room may not be in the same season at all, because seasons, as I say, cycle. And sometimes I can be having winter and spring, or winter and summer, or spring and autumn, whatever, because I am my own universe and I direct my own cycles. And so for those of us here who are not feeling all that hotsy-totsy, and who don't even know why we're sitting here in the first place or how we came to be here. We just came because it's Easter, or somebody dragged us along, or it just seemed a nice thing to do, or to wear pretty clothes, or whatever that is. The real reason why we are here is because of an impulse within us that's calling us higher, calling us into a deeper and more vibrant sense of life and living. And so as we celebrate this beautiful occasion, we look to one of the way shores that have walked amongst us, Jesus the Christed One, Jesus of Nazareth. And when you study this amazing individualized expression of source, you are awed by the extraordinary ordinariness of the man. So ordinary, it was extraordinary. The circumstances into which he came, the lifestyle that he came into and that he embraced, and so on. Very, very ordinary. He came in just like you came in, just like I came in. Open question mark, surrounded by a sea of question marks and a great curiosity within it. And so delving always into the meaning of life and living within and without. Observing, paying attention, conscious, focused, If you take up the Gospel of St. Mark and you read it straight through, you get a sense of urgency, 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 urgency. It's great urgency in it. It's that that wants to know, wants to learn, wants answers to questions. Is understanding of immediacy and is understanding of power being in the present moment, right here and right now. Not concerned with the past, not concerned with the future. Learning from the past, fortifying the self in the present so that the future can unfold in a much more glorious way. That's the way a Christed consciousness lives. And so what is this thing called Christ? It's not indeed the last name of Jesus, Jesus Christ. It is an energy, it is a principle that lives in you, that lives in me. It's an energy and a principle that preceded Jesus and everybody else for that matter. Christ is a conscious awareness that always existed right in the beginning, before the beginning, right now, and always will be. It is a consciousness that realizes truth, whatever that is. And you and I get glimpses of it, but we're always endeavoring to unfold more of it. Truth out there in a vacuum? No. The truth of life and living within me, truth as me, showing up as me, consciousness showing up as me. And so, how did Christ go about? How did Jesus Christ go about entering into the fullness and the awareness of the truth of his being? The same way you and I get to do it. There is one way and only one way and no other way. So the way Jesus entered into it was to be cognizant and aware that there was something greater in him than he could even recognize. But there was a feeling of an otherness, and that otherness was the oneness that runs through all life. And so he allowed himself to be open and to be receptive to that unfolding itself by means of him. And he learned the great spiritual skill of being able to golden key everything. What is it to golden key everything? To take your mind off circumstances, situations, and conditions. To take your mind out of the realm of the ego, of mortal mind, and move it into a focus on an infinite, cosmic, intelligent, conscious awareness. We simply say, take your mind off your problem and put your mind on your good. Take your mind off the littleness of the self and its circumstances and put your mind on God, whatever you conceive God to be. And God is simply the all-embracing universal presence that is infinite intelligence, infinite unconditioned and unconditional love. It is the givingness of life unto itself and the sustaining of that, the supporting of that, and the ever unfolding of that. God, the word, comes from an old German word which means Almighty Good. And I love that term for this thing called God, Almighty Good. So the Almighty Good within me, within you, is always endeavoring to express more of itself. If we could just get out of the way, how did Jesus do it? How did Siddhartha Gautama do it and become that Buddha conscious awareness of a wakefulness? How did any of the great ones, the enlightened ones, do it? They did it by stopping the process of over-identification with the egoic mind, with the small self, with the human self, and started to focus upon the divine nature of the self within. And so how it happened was, with Jesus and others, they always were cognizant at the center of their being of this divinity, and that was where their focus was, on the divinity within them, around them, and about them. And they knew that that divinity was greater than they were. They knew that that was a power and a presence within them that could take them into any good that they so desired. Jesus discovered the law of life and how it expresses itself, the law of mind and action, the law of consciousness. And he had learned that when you are aligned with that beautifully, impeccably, in that centered awareness of only the one thing going on, life happening, God happening, whatever you want to call it, that law would obey him. And through the use of that law, he could indeed do great things. But here's the thing about that. Jesus is the great example, not the great exception. Jesus was as ordinary as anyone can be in the beginning. And his message was, you too can do great things as I have done, and indeed greater things can you do, because now are you the sons and daughters of this almighty good, of God. Now are you the sons and daughters of almighty good, of God. Now are you the sons and daughters of the Father. Father was one of the favorite names Jesus used for this almighty good, for this power, for this presence, for this infinite beingness that he had recognized within himself and around him and about him and everywhere present. That was the name. And that name, Father, that name, beautiful name, was used at the time of Jesus in that culture as an endearment, So in that Hebrew and Aramaic culture, people would call each other father, whether you're male or female, whether you're brother or sister, whether you're father or mother or whatever. People would call each other that endearing term father, which indicated a deep intimacy and a deep communion. And it was a word like sweetheart or beloved or darling. And so when Jesus related to that which was greater than he was touching a power, he was touching a presence within himself and within every living thing, recognizing it. And it made them the great iconoclast that he was. Jesus was a pain in the flesh to everybody around him. He really annoyed and disturbed the status quo. Society was put out by him. His family was put out by him. His friends were put out by him, because he recognized that universal presence in everything and everyone. So you would find him in the company of fallen women, for heaven's sake, for Samaritan women, my goodness me, in the presence of children. These were groups that society ignored and put to the side, because we're still living in a patriarchal society way back in that time, and to some extent in some places on the planet we still are. So these were the people that were shunned, not given much emphasis at all. He found himself befriending tax collectors. For heaven's sake, do not understand that tax collectors were the most hated group amongst the Jewish people, because they were in cahoots with the Romans, collecting taxes for the enemy, the Romans. Tax collectors, all kinds of weird, and the hang-me-downs of society. He made no differentiation between them and the hoi polloi of society either. So you would find him in all kinds of groups and in all kinds of company. Much to the contrary, Jesus didn't just always hang out with the poor and the unfortunate and the downtrodden. There wasn't one great party in town that he didn't attend. He was in the midst of it all. He was everywhere present, because everybody recognized in him something that they sought for in themselves. He had that universal presence about him that could be at home anywhere. That was the Christ-conscious awareness within him, unfolding. So, to the extent that Jesus extrapolated himself out of the human domain, stopped over-identifying with his humanity, and started to deeply identify with the divinity within himself, to that extent was he becoming Christed more and more and more, until eventually there was no difference between himself and his source, between himself and infinite being, between himself and the Almighty, because he was able to leave the realm of duality and separation of humanity and enter into the unified beingness of the presence of the divine. And it wasn't the divine in some holy temple or under some holy tree or by some holy river or in some holy building. It was by discovering all of that within himself himself. And in so doing, discovering it within everything and everyone else too. There was no difference between anything and anyone and himself. It all blended it into one beautiful, unified whole. And so, when people got upset with him and people got annoyed with him and so on and so forth, it was because he understood from compassion and loving kindness that they were just not yet returned to the truth of their own being, and they were on their way, and on their way they were finding pockets of darkness and pockets of confusion and pockets of all of this, that, and the other that was kind of slowing them down. But he knew they were on their way home. Why? Because he discovered, and he knew, as you and I can too, that we are held by a universal, unconditioned and unconditional love that will not let us go. We are held by a power that will not allow us to fail. We are held by a life that will not let us die. We are held by an infinite beingness that is eternal, constant, and continuous, and that's the true nature of ourselves. And he discovered that, as did the Buddha, as did others too. And that's what the Christ consciousness is. It is the principle of sonship realized in the individualized expression of spirit in and through and by means of each and every one of us. And we're all demonstrating that to some degree or another. Jesus was able to bring it on home and come home to himself and discover the truth within himself. And that is why, one of the reasons why he told the story of the prodigal son. Here was the prodigal son. Never was there a more debauched young man, child of a parent, than this young man. Never was there a greater ingrate to parents than this young man. And yet, no matter what, that young fellow was able to come to himself, is the term, and I love it. Come to yourself. My mother used to say that, come to yourself, child. Come to himself, get up, rise up out of his doom and gloom and his misery and condition, and return back on to his father and the home he knew in childhood, and be reinstated as the glorious heir to the fortune of the family alongside of his brother. A great story, one of my favorite ones in all of the scriptures, out of all of the scriptures, and there are many. That is one of my favorite stories, because it tells us that it doesn't matter how far we might stray, no matter how sideswiped we have been, there is no getting away from the love that eternally holds us. And we can stray up and down the yin-yang, but you know what? That power and that presence is straying with us, right alongside of us. There's no getting away from it. It will always be in the midst of us. And that infinite love is a very real and present help, we are assured. And that when we call upon it, its response to us is immediate, and there's no doubt about that in the mind of a Christed, individualized expression of truth, which is what each one of us are on the way into discovering. And we're all at different stages, but it doesn't make anyone better than anyone else or less than anybody else. The same fire, the same light, the same pristine truth that was in Christ Jesus is in you and is in me in all its resplendor right now. And it cannot be added to and it cannot be diminished, because it is eternal. And it is immutable law in and of itself. That's the law of your nature, your essence, and mind too. So you may be sitting there thinking how awful you are, how awful you've been, how awful your life is, how dreadful your circumstances are, how dreadful your situations are, while all the time this fire, this light is waiting to be resurrected in you by you allowing it to rise up and flow through you and take care of all of those conditions, because it can. It can. But what do you have to do? You have to do the same thing Jesus did. You have to trust it. You have to trust his creative process, and you have to hand yourself up and give yourself up entirely and completely to it. You have to surrender your egoic control on your life and living and relax into the beauty and the grace of allowing yourself to be led and guided by the truth of Spirit within you that is always on your side, always supporting you, always wanting your good, and has only one desire and one desire alone, that your life might be abundant and your joy complete, and that you might reach a peace that passes understanding. That's the only desire of the divine for you. Life in abundance, joy complete, and peace that passes understanding. And it doesn't matter how awful you've been, how dreadful you've been, how terrible you've been, how much you think that what you've done could never be forgiven. It's all baloney and nonsense. Nonsense that you're hanging on to that doesn't serve you well. It's time to let that go and leave the past where it belongs behind you. Today is a new day, and you can rise up in that newness, brand new, and face the remainder of your time on this plane with grace and ease and peace and joy and loving relationship, and expressing beautifully the creativity of infinity within you. Would you like to do that? Yeah. Well, what in heaven's name is stopping you except your own egoic, controlling mind self? Now that can be brought to peace, that can be brought to rest, that can be rescued, and it can be nurtured and nourished into balance and calm and peace, so that it stops sabotaging your desire to unfold as the infinite expression of a life divine, which is good and very good. You, yes, you and me standing here too, we can do this, not because of our own endeavor and effort, not because of the great whoop-de-doo that we are, but because of the beautiful power and grace and presence of the almighty splendor of life itself, wanting to express itself fully, magnificently by means of you and by means of me. Each one of us is that point of power through which infinite intelligence wants to express itself in all its glory and magnificence, but it cannot do it without your allowing it and without your permission and without your saying yes to it, because the divine never comes uninvited. It has to be invited. It will not impose itself. You must invite it. I must invite it. We must say yes to the life, the splendid life that wants to live itself through, in, and by means of each one of us, because we can. We are pre-approved for this. We are set up for this. It's in our spiritual DNA to be all that we can be if we go with the flow of life and living through a surrendering of the egoic state of mind, through you and I starting the process of enlightenment, resurrection, by every day identifying less and less and less with our humanity and more and more and more with our divinity, the power and the presence and the truth of being within us. Each one is a glorious note in the symphony of the divine. Each one is an essential note in the symphony of the divine. Each one will be that amazing, tremendous harmonic note in the divine when we stand up to ourselves, face ourselves, and say yes to the truth of our being. Because without you as that note, life couldn't be itself. Life would be incomplete and the universe would implode upon itself without you and your beautiful, amazing note of truth and joy. Are you on for it? Yeah. Are you up for it? Yeah. Are you equal to it? Yeah. Are you able for it? Yeah. Are you ready? Yeah. When? Now. And so it is.